did this week that were important, or part of some of the things we wanted to accomplish. Obviously, you saw some higher education bills, looking at a 5-year tuition freeze. Is something I think that really, we've talked about affordability of college education, but I think at the same time, part of that conversation is to make sure that we're looking at really making sure the regions are becoming more efficient as they deliver services. That's going to be the long-term solution in helping keeping college affordable. We passed a bill today that I think, hopefully you guys all heard Representative Meyer talk about, looking at applying to a waiver to the feds to make sure we're adding some mental health beds. I think that's something that we've been hearing from our constituents for several years. I know I have, and I know members of the caucus have as well. So I would take a look at that bill. I think it's something that can really have a positive impact and add more mental health beds here in the state of Iowa. So those are two things that just kind of popped in my head as I was coming up, and then I'll leave it open to you guys on anything else that we may or may not have done. So
during her news conference, the governor said she's going to keep pushing for the tobacco tax hike. She said it's important because 70% of lung cancer cases are linked to tobacco use. She says she's not the tax hiker herself, but this seems different. You didn't have an opinion last week. Have you talked to your caucus?
we have not caucused on the further. Obviously, we had a bill that we took that out of part of some of our conversations that we had at the committee level at this point. I think that's going to be more of a tax conversation. We're having we're trying to wrestle with that same thing. Obviously we've continuing to reduce taxes on Iowans, looking at 3.8% flat tax, looking at retirement, eliminating on retirees. So as a caucus trying to decide, is this something that we really want to try to tackle? I don't know if we're in a position to do that yet. Whether it pops up or not again, I can't say, but our first action was not to include it in the bill that it was proposed in. So I think right now that's kind of the holding pattern we're in at this point.
The House passed the Drug Free Homeless Services yesterday. Have you spoken to the Senate whether they're in the
What was the last part? I'm sorry.
Have you spoken to your Senate colleagues on whether they're interested in getting the second voting on?
So as far as specific bills, whether it's that one or anything specifically, I know our committee chairs and members that are running bills are having conversations across, I have weekly meetings obviously with the Senate, with the governor and leadership. So we're kind of getting to the point in session where we'll start identifying each other's priorities. I'm unaware of whether they have committed to moving that bill or not, but we tried to get some bills over to the Senate this week that didn't necessarily have companions in the Senate to make sure that if there was action to be taken, that there'd be time to do that. So that's kind of where we included a lot of bills at the end.
So over in the Senate, we're starting to see some movement on property tax bills. Obviously, they had the meeting about the governor's bill. I think they've got a subsecond for next week on their property tax plan. Where do your negotiations stand there? And what's your response to comments from Senator Dawson about tax-increment financing and feeling that issue is kind of holding things up?
I don't necessarily think that tax-increment financing is holding things up. We recognize that is a system that's been in place for a long time. Is there some changes that we could do to it? And we've been clear with everyone, whether it's cities, counties, developers, that if there is some modernization of the system, we'd be open to that conversation. I don't think we want to necessarily just throw it overboard because we recognize the importance of it. I don't think that is the piece that's holding anything up, but I would also say I don't necessarily think that we're held up at this point either, just in general, regardless of what the issue would be. I think we're having some good conversations with the governor, with the Senate, to try to find some level of common ground. Like I said, we start from the position of that 2% cap, between our bill and the governor's bill. The Senate has maybe a little bit different than ours, but we're really starting at some of the higher level pieces with being fairly close. So I don't even see us in a position where I feel like we're held up at this point. We knew this was going to take time. That's why we put it out early, and tax conversations usually drag towards the end of sessions.
Yeah, Senator Dawson also mentioned that he has, it's not really clear on the path forward for a strict 2% revenue cap. So how are negotiations on that?
Well, I think, from my perspective, as far as not negotiating in the public, I don't think that's going to be helpful for us in any way. But what I can say, we feel pretty strongly about having a 2% cap. That's a clear cap. That isn't going to be something that can just change. We want to be consistent with this approach. We think ultimately, if you stick a 2% cap in there, that's going to lead to our local governments providing services in a more efficient manner. So again, I think all these things will work themselves out, and still feel confident we'll be able to achieve what we build on.
On Monday, the House approved, I think it was House File 2519. It was related to accrued interest on child support that's delinquent. The fiscal note showed that would be really expensive. It would require, I think, 18 new FTEs. at a cost of about $3 million the first year and another $1.5 million the second year. Did you encourage Representative Harris to file that bill? And if so, what was the thought process behind that bill?
Well, I think a lot of the bills that you're seeing when you're seeing a lot of bills that are coming up, we're seeing a lot of fiscal notes. I think you heard it, Representative Meyer. I just kind of use this as a generality. I think you saw Representative Meyer even said today on the floor that as we've seen these bills come forward, that we don't know necessarily if every single fiscal note is as consistent as what we'd like to see. We had a fiscal note on a bill that Representative Meyer ran today that was not consistent within the past. So we recognize and appreciate the fiscal notes, but at the same time, as the legislature, we have to decide whether we have full confidence in every single dollar that's accounted for in that. Like the bill we had today only accounted for potential expense. It didn't look at all the potential savings when it came to adding new beds to the system. And I think as we've done any of these pieces of policy, we'll address some of those costs as we get to the budget time.
And then related to that, the Senate approved a bill yesterday on public assistance, and the fiscal note was just full of HHS did not provide the information to the Legislative Services Agency on one division after another. Do you have concerns that the executive branch is not providing the information that the Legislative Services Agency needs to calculate these fiscal notes?
I mean, we obviously want to have a fiscal note for every bill that we can do. At the same time, we recognize with all the pieces of legislation that are moving through the process, whether they get fully done, whether the information is submitted. I think we do have an expectation that the information is being submitted. We do recognize that it can take time when you have an extremely complicated bill, but there is an expectation from the legislature that we would have as much information as possible as we're making those decisions.
I guess to follow up on that, have there been any discussions about forcing or making agencies provide that information, or discussions about how to make that process, I guess, easier, either on the agency or on OSA?
I would say not necessarily, parts of that being just from the budgeting standpoint. We'll have to look at how we're getting our information, how timely that information is as we get closer to the budget process. Those are conversations that we have to have with departments. I don't want to stand here and act like I'm picking on one department because I'm not doing that. But we've been very clear, there is an expectation for us to have information. We do understand things take time as well. But if they were being withheld just because they don't want to share it, I don't think the legislature would be okay with that. But I don't think necessarily that's what's happening in all these cases.
We've seen a couple of bills move through or advance this session that would kind of scale back the powers and responsibilities of the governor's office. I guess your thoughts on those proposals, and is that kind of an indication of concerns about how things might shake out with the open governor's race?
I think since you asked, I'm not picking on you, Tom, in my response, so bear with me. But I think that there is a huge want to attach every bill that we're passing in the legislature right now because there's some sort of looming election. We're in the House, we run every 2 years. Every 2 years we have a looming election, and every 4 years of those, we have a governor's race. And so I've been telling everyone as we're making these decisions, if we want to operate because there may be an election, well, there will be an election, there may be a different governor, regardless of party, we would just be frozen and do nothing here. And so as we look at this, I've said this before and I continue to say it, we had a continuity of government from the Branstad to the Reynolds administration, a lot of similar folks. They did a lot of things the same way, they did a lot of things differently, but at least we knew we were going to get with them. Regardless of election outcome, there will be someone else in this office that we haven't worked with over the last 16 years, the way we have these two previous administrations. So I think that every bill is not necessarily, and very few, if any, are in reaction to anything that may happen in November. It's a long ways till the election.
Have you had any further discussions on the Senate proposal with your caucus in terms of a potential continuing resolution or not having a shutdown?
Yeah. So I had a brief conversation, but I did touch base with Senator Clemish. I don't think we reached a level of resolution. I think he was just looking at it from a standpoint, and it makes sense. I can understand why he's making this case. We just don't want to look like Washington, D.C. If there would ever be a situation where we get down to the last minute. You touched on this, Kay, how 12 years ago or whatever year that would have been, we came down to the final few minutes. My understanding from Senator Clemish, she's trying to avoid a situation where we would look like Washington, D.C., where you could have a potential government shutdown. Beyond that we didn't do any active negotiations. But I also don't want to speak for him, so I'm not trying to put words in his mouth as well. So that's kind of what I took from the conversation.
I have a leftover funnel week question. The House Committee on Environmental Protection advanced no bills in 2023, 2 bills in 2024 about raccoon bounties and campground septic systems, and then each of the last 2 years, only 1 bill that was related to intentional emission of air contaminants. And at the last meeting before the funnel, Representative Kressig asked, why does this committee exist when we're not addressing the environmental problems in Iowa? And the chair called him out of order and said that that wasn't the time to discuss. So I'm asking you, why does the House Committee on Environmental Protection exist, and what do you think they should be working on?
Well, I don't. First of all, I'm not going to take advice from Representative Kressig about which committees the majority party is we're going to have and we're not going to have. I would say from the standpoint, every 2 years, I'll just say since I've been speaker, I don't want to speak for anyone else that came before me. As you've seen, I've added committees through the process. I've changed names of committees, changed responsibilities and duties of committee. Every 2 years, we kind of make a decision on what that would look like. I've had conversations with Representative Fisher as well, and we do have, a Natural Resource Committee and Agriculture Committee. I don't think we can sit here right now and just say, we need to be changing what these committees need to do. From the standpoint, we have a lot of committees that pass a lot of bills out as well, and then people say, you're passing too many bills. So we'll make those decisions as we move forward, and honestly, I hadn't even put any thought into that. We have a long time before I would even have to worry about that. I'll do one more.
The government oversight committee released a report that recommended moving the toward debt collection system to a third-party system. Do you predict that issue does legislation?
So from the standpoint of the report and kind of just what has come from it, what I'm going to say at this point in time, with obviously just seeing that we're going to be in a position where I think all things will be on the table for right now, but we do need to make a decision. I look at that as also part of that budget conversation as well, as we get closer to the end of session, and I think we're going to take those under advisement and decide if any of those suggestions in there need to be further pursued. So. All right, thanks, guys. I appreciate.
Yeah, thanks.
A for the team that showed up today. Make sure you tell Aaron and Steven I noticed.